well-established custom.
And can you tell us anything about the popularity of certain names, why they became so much more popular than others, why Francis perhaps was never chosen until this last pontificate?
Well, there have been a series of quite traditional names. I mean, there's a good list with 266 popes to choose from. There's good, and it ties people back into continuity with the past. Benedict, naming himself after Saint Benedict, and after Pope Benedict XV, the Pope of Peace. I tend to think Pope Benedict XIV, the great scholar pope as well, that he tied himself to. But and then you had the innovation of John Paul, right, having the two papal names. And he will be, if there ever is another Francis, he will have to be Francis I. I mean, he doesn't have any choice.
He will be Francis I.
He will have to be Francis. If there's a Francis II, there's going to have to be. Yeah, he'd have to be retroactively promoted to Francis I. But this is a great moment because it's the first time that we can get an insight into the mind of the new pope when they have this name. So, for instance, if as a lot of people think the new pope may choose the name Leo, we know that that's probably in line with Leo's great work with social justice, with Catholic social teaching, but also hopefully Leo's great work with Catholic academics as well.
But how many Leos have there been?
Well, he would be Leo the 14th. Okay. So there would be Leo the 14th. But the John, you'd have John would be a popular one. Paul would be a popular one, or John Paul III even. But all those will have nuances, right? They'll all have meanings that the Pope will be able to tell us, and we won't be able to exhaust them. I mean, they're suggestive, right? We'll see. Well, that's an interesting name that
and the commentators will be out in force to explain exactly why the Pope chose that particular name. We've seen there's certainly a tradition of choosing names from immediate or close predecessors.
There has been, and Benedict sort of broke that, and that was interesting. And I think that's because we had John Paul and then John Paul. I think that was good to break off from that a little bit. But you're right, they go up and down in popularity. I doubt that we'll get a Sixtus VI. I think that we may have ended that line. That probably won't make it.
We haven't had many Pauls.
We haven't had many Pauls, right? There's been a lot more Johns than Pauls. But that's definitely a possibility. That's not. But then you have these strange names from early in papal history, right? Like Conon or Lando, and those are likely going to continue to stay in abeyance. But a name like Innocent or Clement, right? These were immensely popular in the 17th and 18th century. And they tied them back to those great histories with those names too. I mean, John's was kind of a surprise because there had not been very many creditable Johns in papal history, and so it was kind of a surprise, particularly. And there was controversy even about his numbering because one of the anti-popes of Avignon was John the 23rd. There's actually an anti-pope John the 23rd buried in Florence, so that was confusing as well. But he wanted to make his personal statement with that.
And as you say, some names gain popularity because of wildly popular popes, but some names fall off when you've had a pope who really did have, as you said, a discreditable reputation, and suddenly we see a lot fewer. One of perhaps the most famous bad popes, Alexander VI, and we did have a successor, but afterwards the name just kind of fell into disuse for now since several hundred years.
Right, that's right. But this, I mean, there was very good Alexanders in history as well. There's also not so good Alexanders. But and popes don't always choose a name based on Christian principles. So Pius II, he was Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini, and he was so enamored of the Aeneid that he wanted to be Pius Aeneas. So he was Pius II, not because of any devotion to St. Pius. Julius
because of the devotion to Virgil.
To Virgil. Well, it's much like Dante, right? Our beloved Dante. And Julius II wanted to be named after Julius Caesar. I think so. That worked. But there were both Piuses after Pius II and Juliuses after Julius II. So
having had so many Italian popes, of course, throughout history, all selecting from perhaps what you're talking about, some of the traditional names. I'm wondering what a difference it might make having cardinals from these 70 different countries, and if perhaps we should have a pope from Africa or Asia or again Latin America, wondering what difference that might make in the selection of a name.
That would be interesting because we have had Greek popes and Syriac popes and African popes. The great Pope Gelasius was North African. and Pope Zephyrinus was Syrian. There was a period in the 8th century where we had almost all Greek and Syrian popes. And so looking back to that history would be instructive as well. I mean, to the persecuted Christians of the Middle East or of North Africa, it could point to that and still be rooted in the Church's history as well.
You certainly need a historian on hand, don't you, to help you make this selection. I can see that you're never going to be out of a job.
They've never let historians into the conclave, though. There's no on-call historian, so maybe.
How important is it that a pope be proficient in Latin?
Well, I think it's critical as the patriarch of the West and as the head of the Latin Rite of the Catholic Church. I mean, it's pretty critical. And you saw, I mean, the when you have these big international events, you notice that the entire thing was conducted in Latin for these cardinals, and it helps in a certain sense to decenter any particular ethnicity or linguistic group that provides something of that common unity that when the liturgy used to be in one language, that did provide that commonality throughout the world, but still today provides it at these really critical moments, so that when all Christians come together in Rome to celebrate Mass with the Pope, that they can sing the Pater Noster in one language, and so I think that's a wonderful thing. So it's pretty critical that he knows. The new Pope will have to know Italian too, since Italian has become the lingua franca of the Holy See.
It was very interesting during the broadcast prior to this one when we watched the cardinals going into conclave, and there was a long moment where each of the cardinals swore to uphold the oath. The full oath was read by Cardinal Parolin, and then each successive cardinal said, "I personally swear to abide by this with my hands on the Gospels." But all of them made that oath in Latin. And if you were watching on the video, you saw they had a cheat sheet in front of them with the precise phrase. But what was really fascinating, you saw Latin cardinals, but you also saw cardinals from Eastern churches from all over the world, and each of them was pronouncing the exact same words in Latin in their own language. And I thought that was one of the most moving parts of the ceremony, where you'd hear an American perhaps with a bit of an Irish accent, and you'd hear a Japanese cardinal or an African cardinal, or cardinals from all over the world.
Mm-hmm. I heard Stephen Brislin
with his
South African accent.
For those of you, I mean, we all remember Pope Benedict pronouncing his Latin with a very strong German accent, which I found very endearing. So it really does offer a kind of point of unity where it's not a living language that's going to be privileged, but it's a language that everybody can kind of have a share in.
And yet the language question, of course, is quite an issue for cardinals coming from so many different countries, perhaps in places where they haven't had an education in Latin to the same degree as would happen here, for example, in the universities, the pontifical universities in Rome, even in the general congregations and so on and so forth. What is the general rule for the language that is spoken? You mentioned the need to speak Italian, of course, if you are elected Pope, because that is the language. As the Bishop of Rome, you're expected to have a good command of Italian, but that isn't necessarily the case for a lot of these men, is it?
Several popes have reiterated the importance of learning Latin, and so, because I mean that's the language of canon law and of all official documents in the Catholic Church. It's really critical that we help to form young priests, especially in emerging countries. But then we also expect them, like you said, we expect them to learn Italian too. And so this is also extremely difficult for particularly non-Mediterranean, non-Western people. And so a privileging of Latin would sort of decenter Italian in that way a little bit. You would still have to learn Italian, but you'd have this more focused on that universal language.
And that's a bit an interesting question. Up until not very long ago, most of the cardinals would have had some common language, maybe not knowing Latin very well, but having a little bit so that they could at least talk to one another. And we already saw in the general congregations before that in the various synods, the synods of synodality, where you have to come up with a language that people can understand, or make sure that different addresses, documents are translated into various languages. For a long time, the cardinals would have been largely well educated, and or when I say well, not good, but in the sense of had a lot of education and maybe could talk to one another. One of the things they've talked about with this conclave, with 133 different cardinals, not all of them speak Italian, not all of them speak English or Spanish, which are somewhat common languages, but they're in a room where if they want to talk to one another, there are some limitations as to their ability to communicate. And that
and we see it with synodality too, right? We often get shunted off into language groups, right? Which is sort of defeating the purpose of the whole idea. I mean, just it's difficult for us to conceive of, say, but Vatican II, to think back to Vatican II, and that the entire thing for 4 years was conducted in Latin, with everyone having an equal voice and able to discuss with one another in that. Now, it's possible that new translation software and things can come and make a difference like this, but having that common tongue has been something that's been very important to the Western world.
That would be an interesting technological change if in some future conclave they're all issued a universal communicator to translate on the spot, and then you don't have to worry about translators coming in and violating.
And I think about that ecumenically too, because I mean the use of Latin transcended the boundaries of the Catholic Church for so many centuries. In Europe, it was the common diplomatic language. It was the language. There's a famous exchange between C.S. Lewis and an Italian priest. Neither of them spoke the other's language, so they wrote each other letters in Latin. And so that is one of those commonalities too that we all share.
Yeah. And we're still waiting for the
even the seagulls.
Even
the seagulls.
Even the seagull has given up.
Yeah.
I'm hearing it's getting chilly out there as well.
And one of the things that we can expect is that at least some of the cardinals probably have in mind what effect this is having on people outside.
I would think, yes.
Could be a good sign because, or it could be just that they're waiting to burn the ballots. Who knows?
But they should, because it's just one ballot, that they wouldn't have to wait after the scrutiny is done.
But as you were saying earlier, I think, Chris, this is going to affect timings, isn't it? I'm imagining not just today, but we start again tomorrow morning. Just give us a recap of the times that are expected. The cardinals gather again at 9 o'clock in the morning, is that right? Inside the Sistine Chapel.
They begin with Mass and prayer. The actual voting is largely, as we've said, it's not a point. The conclave is not a place where people are going to get up and give campaign speeches or much speeches at all. I've heard many cardinals talk about conclaves as more like a retreat than anything else. And when they come into the Sistine Chapel and do the vote, that's all they do. So what we've been kind of expecting, it's very imprecise, as we're seeing even as we speak. We're kind of expecting the first votes to take place and maybe be finished up by 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the morning.